tonight we welcome Ernie Hebert. We couldn't figure out if it's 5 or 6 or maybe more times back to the Norwich Bookstore. And to introduce him, he was born and raised and is still living in southern New Hampshire, where much of his writing, but not all of it, is set. He worked for a reporter for the Keene Sentinel, the Boston Globe, and the New Hampshire Times. And then in the mid-'80s, he was writer-in-residence at Keene State College, which was followed by a position, as many of you know, at the English department at Dartmouth, where he's currently professor of English and creative writing. And I thought it was really interesting. I'm going to quote him. He said, "It's his mission as a novelist to write about working people without idealizing or demeaning them, and without standing them up against the wall to represent some political ideology or notion of the author." And I thought that was a really well-phrased description of what he actually accomplishes in his wonderful novels. In addition to the Derby Chronicles, he's written several standalone novels like The Old American and my personal favorite, Never Back Down. And with the publication of this book, Howard Ellman's Farewell, we return the spotlight to the protagonist of the first novel in the series, which was The Dogs of March, which was published back in '79. Howard was in his early 50s then. He's now 68. And the book begins with the 100th birthday party of Howard's only living close friend. And with that, I'll turn the evening over to Ernie.
Thanks. This is the imaginary town of Derby, New Hampshire. It's actually, the geography is actually of Westmoreland, which is where I live. But culturally, it's 3 towns squeezed together. There's Westmoreland, which is kind of a commuter town, commuter farmer town. There's no very rich people in Westmoreland. There are no mansions. And the town bans trailers, so there's no trailer park. It's just kind of bland, middle-class town. And I like it that way. Center Derby is about here, town hall. This is Derby Depot, which is where the poor people live in Derby, and that's based on a part of Sullivan, New Hampshire, way back when, where there were a lot of shacks and trailers and stuff. And Westmoreland used to have a sign. Maybe some of you who are of a certain age will remember there was a sign that would say Basketville off of 991. Mm-hmm. That sign was about here, but in Derby I've moved it up here. I wanted to put it near Derby Depot. And the second Derby book, A Little More Than Kin, starts out with that sign. We have the trust lands. The trust lands are lands that are conservancy. I'm a big conservancy guy myself. This part of Derby, along the Connecticut River, I call it River Derby. And I didn't actually come up with that phrase until I wrote this book. And then there's Upper Derby, which is where all the rich people live. And that's based on Dublin, New Hampshire. Has anybody here been to Dublin, New Hampshire? Dublin has, has great views of Mount Monadnock, and it has Dublin Lakes, a very beautiful area, and it was a place where a lot of wealthy people used to go. And my mother was actually a nanny for, that's the word we use today. She would have not liked that word. My mother was a registered nurse, but she needed a job. And she worked for the Cabot family in a mansion known as Pompelli Hill, a mansion that was so big that there were there had enough service of it. With one guy, his only job was to polish things. That's all he did, was polish things. So it was a really old-fashioned mansion. And my mother met my dad there. He was a mill worker from Keene, and they met in a blind date. I'll have to tell you that my mother was 31 when she met my dad, and and later she told me about her life, you know, high school and going to nursing school and meeting my dad. But she left out 5 years between high school and going to nursing school. And I always wondered what she was doing those 5 years. And so one day I asked her, and she revealed her dark secret. She was in the convent.
Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, she met my dad there, and they had 2 things in common. Neither one of them drank, and unlike their oldest son, and they both spoke French. They both had a French background. And my father's mother died when he was 13, and his father remarried a quote-unquote Yankee woman. So they stopped speaking French in the house, and my mother retaught my dad French, and that was the language of their romance. So when I came along as the eldest son, that was the language I learned. And when I went to kindergarten, I didn't speak, I could barely speak English, and I came home and told my parents that I would never speak that awful language again, that's French, and I never did. One of my great disappointments in life. So I wanted to have a really wealthy family. So they're in Upper Darby, and the seven books deals with that social class, all the social classes that you might find in a New England, New Hampshire, or Vermont town. Howard Ellman's Farewell is the 7th novel, and the protagonist is Howard Ellman, who's also the protagonist for the first book, The Dogs in March. And I will say that, Lisa, I'm really glad you read that part about working people, because that's really my thing. I started work when I was 16. I worked in the factory, and I worked all the way through. I was in the Army. I worked for the phone company. All through college, I worked. I drove taxi, and I didn't get what you would consider a regular middle-class job until I was 31, when I started as a newspaper reporter. So I spent 15 years really as a quote-unquote working man. So these working men, almost all men, very rarely working women, were my mentors, and so I have a lot of respect for them. And what I've tried to do with my books is I wanted to give them an interior world. I read a lot of books about working people, but they usually serve the purpose for the author. Grapes of Wrath is a book like that. It's a wonderful novel, but it really serves the purposes of the author. And what I didn't see in the books about the American canon, I didn't see books where we saw the interior life of working people. And I know that there's a couple books I love to hate. One of them is The Great Gatsby, where working people are either ignored, demeaned. The only person in that book who has a job is the stupid killer. Everybody else is, Anyway, I set out to try to. That was my mission as a writer. So I'm going to read now, but I'm going to read in a different way than I usually do. Fiction writers usually read a chapter, and it's hard when you have a novel to really typify a novel with one chapter. I've never been satisfied with it. And so what I ended up doing, I told you I like to write about the interior life of characters. Well, my protagonist, Howard Ellman, is in his 80s, and he knows he's reaching the end of his line, and he's trying to deal with that. All of a sudden, after his wife dies, he starts talking to himself. He actually does talk to himself, and he talks to himself in his head. So I had decided to take those parts of the novel and make them into poems. So that's what I'm going to read. I'm going to read poems, and I call it the Contrarian Voice. So the voices you'll hear are Howard, sometimes arguing with the contrarian voice, Sometimes you'll hear just the contrarian voice, and sometimes you won't know the difference, because I'm not sure I do either. This is going to suggest some of the plot of the book, too. Howard is an octogenarian. He's in his middle 80s. He's not exactly sure how old he is, because he was a foundling. Let's call him 86, just for the hell of it. His best friend is Cootie Patterson, who's a hermit. And Cootie has just turned 100 years old. And Cootie's big thing is he has a stew pot that he claims, or actually Howard claims, has never been cleaned, has never been emptied. He just keeps adding to it. So I'm going to read, this is called All in the Pot. Pick up car-killed creatures along the highways for the centenarian's stew pot. Birds of different feathers, coyotes, deer, porcupines, woodchucks, squirrels, muskrats, beavers, raccoons, many raccoons. Perhaps a bear cub, and even a fisher cat. Please, no skunks. Add vegetables from grocery store dumpsters and compost piles. An occasional noodle or grain, herbs with the H's removed, and salt. As Leo Lavoie used to say, not too much now. The octogenarian laughs and says, you and me, we've gone off the deep end. Deep end? End of what? The centenarian seemed to ponder the phrase. Then he repeated, deep end? End deep. How deep is deep? How far the end, and where do we go from there? Smacking his lips as if tasting the words. But of course it was only the stew. In this poem, you'll hear Howard's voice and the contrarian voice. It's called Doozy. You never made big money, but earned what I got. Not hard to do it, it ain't much. Only formed two worthwhile friendships, Ollie Jordan and Cootie Patterson, a reprobate and a hermit. Served my country best I could, work to build the country best I could. Failed. Hunted a white-tailed deer. Think maybe hunting is inherited like a serious overbite. You married too young, but stayed together. You never really got to know her, but produced healthy children, except too many. That last one, a surprise, a doozy. A doozy? What is a doozy? A doozy is a daughter singing, startling, and sweet as boiling maple sap spilled on fresh snow. Ache of her loss, a guilt, a feeling you resist. I don't respect guilt writers, but there it is, Howie, a guilt. Smoked the camel with great pleasure, gave up the camel, not soon enough to save your wife. Second-hand smoke. The past hangs over you, preventing you from hiking that last trail into the gloom of dark matter. No? Yes, I admit it. Least you could do, voice, is let me forget. A man can look neither to the past nor to the future because there's no such thing as time. That's right. The only legit questions are found in the pauses between changes, calls for immediate action, the now what's. Your son got it right with that word you can't pronounce. Actually, it's a word I can't pronounce. The interstices, how do you say that word?
Interstices.
How do you say it?
Interstices.
Interstices. Interstices. Thank you. Interstices. And I could never figure out how to say that word, so I figured neither does Howard, right? And then the next line is, oh, shut up. Will not. Listen to me. Do not dwell on conditions that presume a flow of time, hope, yearning, nostalgia, regret. Guilt fades with the echoes. All is quiet for now. The voice will be back. This is a very short scene here, and I thought this would make a nice poem. It's called Plow Guy's Lament. Everybody has a plow guy around here, right? About 6 inches had fallen. Nice little storm. Junior Kruger was just finishing up plowing out the driveway. Howard walked over to the truck. Junior rolled down the window. How come you, not your dad? He bought the farm yesterday. Junior spoke just as calmly as one talking about the weather. Bought the farm? How did that come to mean kicking the bucket? Kicking the bucket and buying the farm mean the same thing? Kicking a bucket and buying a farm at the same time would kill anybody. I'm sorry to hear that, Junior. Actually, you're not sorry. In fact, the news gave you a jolt of vigor. Well, I outlived that bastard. It was so sudden, Junior said. He held the steering wheel in a kind of caress. Howard figured Junior's only emotion at the moment was glee at the thought of inheriting an almost new truck. The grief would come later. And this is another lamentation. It's called Widower's Lament. Munch on a village store grinder while you imagine Eleanor standing at the sink and gazing out the window at the bird feeder, just as she had done in life. Tell her how sad you are at the loss of your tree, connections and conniption fits that enriched your life. Cooties Patterson's stew pot, 1,000 memorized glimpses of Derby trees, stone walls, ledges, old mossy gravestones, fences and horses and cows and chickens and porcupines and deer and skunks and woodchucks and beavers and squirrels, gray and red, and damn raccoons, the screeching foxes, the screechier fisher cats, and once in a while a coyote, couple times a bear, bobcats. No, you never saw a bobcat. Saturday morning yard sales, old tools, junk cars, rides to the dump with Freddie when he was a boy, your mechanic's pit that Freddie helped you dig when he was a boy, the sky over your property, town meetings, disasters, in the sun. Freddie, why did you change your name? Even black flies, yes, even you, evil ones, home. Don't you understand, Eleanor? We are giving up our home, our town, our region, our weather, our soil, our nighttime star show, our very selves. The worst of it, Howie, is that your anger, the fire that kept you stoked all these decades, yes, that had produced smoke to shield my fear, has died to embers. The figure of Eleanor fades, and without it, loneliness envelops you, a kind of suffocating poncho. Actually, I blew that line. It is a kind of suffocating protection, like a poncho, in a foxhole, on a rainy night in war. This was a lot of fun to write. I get this idea when I went to a birch mill, you know, where they only cut birch. This was up in northern New Hampshire, and all they did was white birch, and they made Scrabble tiles. One of the things they made. It's called tiny tiles. White birch logs cut with a bandsaw and put through machines to make Scrabble tiles, to be stamped with letters which would be arranged on game boards to make words that would be scattered by a cat and rearranged into a pattern and questioned on the basis of their authenticity, and so on until the human epic ended in a great stillness. That's your end, Howie. No fire, no ice, just stillness, which gets the 8-letter bonus, but whose individual letters are only worth a point each on Eleanor's Scrabble board, which she played alone because you pissant fraud, didn't like losing it, would not indulge her, and face it, didn't know that many words to spell. Howie, Eleanor had said, correctly does not have a wreck in it. This is there's a name here that a character I call Lawrence Draker. Does anybody know where that name comes from? Lawrence Draker.
Yeah. It's a sign on the highway.
It's a sign on I-93.
Yeah.
But there's some great signs on I-91 that make great characters. Chester Ludlow. And then some fancy guy, a Scotney Windsor. You know, so you know, you can be creative just looking at the road signs. And I'll tell you, too, that my mother comes into this. My mother was in love with Lawrence Welk. And she used to love to watch Lawrence, but she called him Bubbles. So anyway, this is called hell. Howard was thinking about the devil, which of course he did not believe in, at least not strictly. A guy with horns sticking out of his head and a tail. Why would the devil have a tail? Balance? If there is a devil, he would not look like the devil. The devil would be a smoothie. He would look like Lawrence Draker, who was, by the way, a selectman in town that Howard hates. Howard suddenly realized that Draker resembled that boring band leader Eleanor had a crush on, Lawrence Welk. You may or may not have to face the devil, but you do have to face death. Think about the possibilities. In bed, sleeping, car crash, slow-mo and incapacitated in a nursing home, a fall, lost in the woods, lost in dementia, ice pick in the ear, gunfight like John Wayne in The Shootist, squashed, wrestling with Bev Buford in a giant bowl of Jell-O. In the afterlife, for your sins, Howie, for your sins, strapped down in front of a TV that's on. What's on what's on in my long night? Lawrence Welk Band for all eternity. This comes right out of my own sensibility. It's called the swing. And also, the swing plays a big role in the plot of this book. Daddy, I want to swing. Push me. You start her off. Release her. Watch her. She's on her own now, pumping the swing, pumping, pumping, leaping from the greatest height into the great big chasm of her destiny. You understand now, don't you, Howie? Yes. Once the child can pump the swing for herself, the male parent is no longer necessary. Howard, Howard's a widower, but he has a kind of a crush on Bev Buford, who's the town clerk, I think beauty is beautiful. I think people fall in love with some people that we may not think they're beautiful. But anyway, this is Howard's idea of beauty. It's called beauty. The only person at this hour in the town hall was Bev Buford. Bev was only maybe 50, but she acted 75, which for you, Howie, is the attraction. She refuses to use a computer and types all the town business on an ancient IBM Selectric typewriter. I figure she's, what's that word with a tit in it? Titillated. Yeah, that's the one. Sexually titillated by her power to manipulate the ball that strikes the patent. Actually, it's you, Howie, who is titillated watching her type. You resist the urge to shout, "Type my balls." Bev is one of those women blessed with giant bassoons. She has a big frame, wide all the way around, grand hips, protruding ass, shoulders like a sidewalk curb. With her squared glasses and drab gray dress, she looks like a cement truck driving into the sun. And the last line is yes, beautiful. Howard meets, my favorite chapter in this book where Howard meets a granddaughter he didn't know he had. It's my favorite chapter. And there's a little riff in there that I've made into a poem. So it's called One Kind of Sadness. The girls seem to be holding back tremendous energy and at the same time a great sadness. It was the sadness of youth, different from the sadness of old age. He'd seen the sadness in his children, remembered, experienced it himself, oh, so many years ago. A feeling that there was so much to see, so much to do, so much to grab for, and you didn't know what it was, but you wanted it all, but not alone. You wanted it all with that special person that lived only in your imagination. All of it. Knowledge, love, adventure, exploits, the admiration of elders, the respect of peers, thrills, many thrills, all of it. And the sad part was that all of it appeared to be out of And this is the poem that I'm still working on. That isn't quite right yet, but I'm going to read it just to hear what it sounds like. You know, John Steinbeck used to entertain. He liked to, and he and his wife liked to entertain. And he would work, and then they would have cocktails in the late afternoon. But before the cocktails came, you had to listen to Steinbeck, John Steinbeck, read his work for the day. But he had a rule, which was no comments. You just have to listen to it. And I think that the lesson there is that when you read before an audience, you feel things that you don't feel if you're just reading it to yourself. And usually, if something's bad, you go like, oh, geez, did I write that? You know, something that you didn't see when you were typing it comes out in the reading of it, which is one reason I think that we have our students read to each other. So I'm at that point now, so you're my guinea pig audience.
No comments, right?
No, I wouldn't dare to try to stop you from calling me.
Impossible.
Well, actually, I'd welcome anybody who knows can tell me how to make this work. Well, it's called a Contrarian Voice, and it's longer than the others. He tripped and almost fell. Oh, you have to know that Howard has told his youngest daughter and his grandson that he was named after, and that he named himself Elman after a particular tree that grows on the trust lands. This, of course, is just made up. He didn't do that at all. It's a total lie, but he likes it. And then what happens is somebody cuts down the tree, and the MacGuffin in the book is who cut down Howard's elm tree, and that's what makes the plot move. He tripped and almost fell. Hip, but he regained his balance, and there it was, the corner of a log sticking out of the sandbank. He had found his namesake tree, the lo and behold elm that those bastards cut down and buried. Are you weeping out of happiness, Howie? Or is it the great sadness of the end? Or maybe just an old man's female hormones? Shut up, voice. I just got myself in a mood, no big deal. Bring the logs to a sawmill, make boards, erect a casket, lie in it during that long intermission. Can you feel it in your grave, petrifying with the tree, tree to stone, man to stone, monument to an era? Yeah, I feel it. Era today, gone tomorrow. Don't be a smart ass, Howie. The thing about a sandbank is that it visibly changes. What you see today is not what you get tomorrow. It is like watching the evolution of a celestial body speeded up. Aging is like that. When you're a kid, time goes by very slowly. The older you get, faster time appears to go bye-bye. Conclusion? No such thing as time. What you think of as time is only change. Clocks measure change, not time. This sandbank is telling you there ain't no God. You think it was the knights of old that built the castles? You think it was the tycoons that laid the rail tracks, put down the asphalt for the highways, stoked the foundry fires, built the rockets, and packed the computer chips? No. It was dirty-faced people like you. You ran the looms in the cotton mill. You hauled the trash. Without you and the likes of you, there would be no civilization. But your offspring have betrayed you. They are ashamed of you. Get out of the way, preferably die. They're going to kill you anyways with their robots. What do you prefer, Howie? Lethal injection, hanging, firing squad, flattened by a steamroller? There's no steamrollers anymore. They all run on diesel. Just the manure of speaking. Well, everything is a manure of speaking. You can't say nothing without it meaning something you don't want it to mean, or don't even know you said. Words corrupt everybody, Howie. What do you think you know? What you think you know is all a big pile of manures of speaking. The ones with no education, the ones who made mistakes in youth and paid for them over a lifetime, the ones with no family values, the ones that built the cathedrals and the pyramids and that stupid wall in China, who sawed the Scrabble tiles, who mined the coal, who built literally everything. The ones left out of The Great Gatsby and most of the rest of literature, they are all fucked. And fucked again, and fucked over, and fucked forever, the working people. I'm gonna, what time is it anyway?
Who knows?
7:35.
What?
7:35.
Okay, it's early. The night is young. This is called Epic. Wonder if they have revenge in the afterlife. Is Bugsy LeClaire lying in wait for me on the other side? Do not concern yourself. No point in guilt, no point in shame, no point in ambition or contrition. Your life is all a show. Cootie Patterson got it right. To feel at home, grab the popcorn and walk into the movie screen. Slide out from the 20th century stockade of guilt into the Looney Tune arcade of our current epic. Epic? How come they don't spell it E-H-P-I-C-K? This is a reference to something I said when we first started this. When I first started here. It's called fricative refract. The act, this is something I wrote like last week. Excuse me, my voice is down. Go. The act has to be physical as well as mental. Lips must move. Tongue must waggle. Teeth grind. Eyes tear up. Mouth widen with smile or fall with frown. Facial muscles animate with feeling. In the car, out loud. On the street, a whisper. Before sleep, captions underneath the mind video when you talk to yourself. This is another one that, another wordplay poem. God, I didn't realize I did so many of this wordplay stuff. I guess I'm just doomed for it. It's called Gnaw. He had taught himself to understand the written word, and sometimes he talked a blue streak. Was it blue streaks that turned people blue in that movie? But he had trouble spelling, and he could only type tiny thoughts with his fat fingers. Tell Charlene that after all these years, you met Heather's daughter, Tohoka McLeod. No, I don't want to start another family avalanche. Tell Charlene you discovered that Critter Jordan paid men to cut down your elm tree, but for reasons unknown. Tell her that there is a dark secret in the town. The squire murdered Ike Jordan. Tell her your plan to build your own coffin. Don't tell her your selfish desires. Apologize to her for being a bad father. Howard typed, cold, wind from the north, see you later. His email got him to thinking, if Gnaw is spelled G-N-A-W, why isn't North spelled G-N-A-W-T-H? He said Gnaw out loud. Click send, and off his email went. He wondered if St. Peter, cranky gatekeeper of Catholic heaven, worked on the internet to keep track of people's sins. And it was that thought that told him he'd had too much to drink. Howard, I got another prop here for you. Except I left it. Oh no, here it is. The publisher has made a very nice cover, but I draw my own covers. This is my cover. Howard Elman's farewell, and Howard in his yard. What Howard has done is he's way back in book one, he burned his house down for reasons that you have to read the book to know. And after his wife died, he has nothing to do with it. He recreates a kind of a shell of his house. He brings in junk cars because he likes junk cars, and he builds just a plywood shell over the trailer he lives in. And his son, who he has kind of Freddie has kind of a tough relationship with, makes a sarcastic joke. Says, welcome to He calls it reincarnation. And Howard decides, well, he likes the phrase and puts up a sign. So that's Howard's sensibility. It's called In the Yard. He loved the startling shapes, textures brought on by time, paint losing struggle with air, incursions of plant life in the crannies of stressed and distressed metal, patterns and play of light made by smashed glass, the fading from something to nothing, the aura of the former owners glowing in the half halo around the junk cars. Well, I'm going to read one more poem that has nothing to do with Howard Elman's farewell. But you know, every once in a while, you write something and you realize, oh, that's why I'm a writer. So this particular poem is the piece of writing that means the most to me personally. So I thought I'd share it with you. I haven't read this. I wrote this quite a while ago, maybe 10 years ago, and I've never read it, and now I've decided I'm going to put it out there. I've read it a couple times, but excuse me. This is called My Mother's Donuts. On your deathbed, you told me the stems of the flowers I picked for you when I was a boy were too short to put in a vase. I didn't have the heart to tell you, you said. I remember the smell of the sun on my clothes that you hung on the line on a hot summer day. And in the winter, the smell of the air from the clothes steaming off the radiators. You remembered how happy you were with a new electric dryer. I remembered you made donuts, I said. The aroma, the heavenly taste when the donut is still hot from the boiling oil. By the time they cooled, the taste was ordinary. In those days, people didn't tie their dogs, you said. Oh yeah, I remember now. They came from miles around, drawn by the smell of your donuts. You always made the mistake of throwing them in the holes. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. You were too weak to laugh. And in the spring, when Dad burned the dead grasses, do you remember that smell? And the color of the new grass growing through the black burn scar after the rain, the brightest green of the new season? There's no waiting for an answer. You shut your eyes. I go back in time, see myself picking flowers, a boy's pure love for his mother. So brief. Okay, that's my thing. Having an allergy attack here. Probably allergic to books. I'm allergic to books. Anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah.
Did you write all of the poems after you'd written the book, finished it?
Yes, I did. I tell you, I've set out to write a guide to the Derby series, essays. Yeah, and I want to draw images from the town. I want to recreate the town visually, and I've started on that project. And as I was writing this, I suddenly realized that you know, a lot of the times when I actually write a particular paragraph. I'll write it like a poem, and then just put it in as prose, because I started my career as a poet. So there's still a poet in me. So then I thought, well, you know, I've got all these ideas of the Contrarian Voice, and it just came together. So I ditched my guide and started writing a book of poems.
Oh, but go back to it. We want the guide too.
Well, if I live long enough, it'll be out there. Thank you.
Are you putting the guide on the web, or is that working out?
Some of it.
Okay. Did you talk to the
I have talked to those people that put me off for 6 months.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I keep hearing from them. Oh, hang on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just stay with it. They'll come to you. They will. I promise.
All right. Well, thank you. Oh, yes, sir. I think I recognize you.
Of course you do.
Yeah, I'll say.
As you know, I'm a historian, and I deal with novels as historical documents. And can you say anything about who reads your stuff?
Who reads my stuff?
Who reads your stuff? Most of it is anchored clearly in New England community. You're Derby series. That went through a period of real fashion, got peaked in the
Right.
mid-80s,
Yeah.
etc. It's very difficult if you're trying to deal with, if you're dealing with censuses and stuff like that as a historian. But it's very difficult to get any idea of readership of the fiction that's set in New England that I read. Now, you've got maybe people contact you, people adopt it in courses. Can you say anything about your imagined readership?
Well, I can say a lot because I've gone to a lot of places, gotten emails, gotten letters, and I have a very complicated answer for you that begins when I was a news reporter. In New Hampshire, you get to cover presidential candidates, and I was covering candidates first time around with Carter, when Carter was elected. And, I was trying to find a way to write something that that nobody else could write. Because the national reporters, they're with them all the time, they know so I was trying to find a way. So I came upon this idea. And I came upon the idea after Carter was elected. I came upon the idea when I was covering the next election. And the idea was that instead of writing about, what the candidate says, I was going to study the audience. And so I came up, and I realized that certain people would always come to certain people's, whatever their politics were. And I could tell whether a candidate was going to do well by the people who came to his things. And a perfect example is my favorite candidate of all time, who I thought would have made a great president, Jerry Brown.
Yeah.
He was by far
Jerry
the
Brown
smartest, best candidate around. But I could tell from the people who followed Jerry Brown, it didn't have a chance.
Thank you,
And then one day I went to hear Reagan speak, and there were all these people in the audience that I had never seen before, and I thought, he's going to win in a landslide. And so I wrote a piece about it. So I actually predicted that based on local people. And I thought, well, you don't have to go all over the world to know something. Just pay attention to your own world, you can figure stuff out. So that's one thing that made me stay here. So I took that idea. In 1984, I was writing Whisper My Name. I had written 2 Derby books, Dogs of March and Little More Than Ken. And I said to myself, who is my readership? And so I thought about all the people that would come that I'd heard from, and the readership came down to local people, but the local people were of a certain class. They were all readers. The people I was actually writing about, the working people, they didn't read my books. The main readership, and by the way, it was only locally that I sold books. I didn't sell any books outside of in volume, anywhere. The main readers over the years have been people who move to the area and somebody gives them the Dogs of March. Oh, this is what you're going to run into. And then I get an occasional professor who's teaching my stuff. So, and then I began to think of something else. Here, I told you this is a long story. But my first agent was Mavis McIntosh, who was John Steinbeck's agent. I happened to stumble into her. She's older. She was an old lady then, and she gave me a bit of advice. She said, "Ernie, don't write a series. They'll only read the first one." And she was right. So in 1984, I was writing Whisper My Name, and I actually had in my head the next 2 Derby books. I had to make a decision about my career. Was I going to break away and try to become a more mainstream writer? Because I knew, if I wrote Dogs of March, which won, which got which got fabulous reviews everywhere, made the New York Times book review, made the daily paper, and did not sell. Well, what makes me think that another Derby book is going to sell? It's just common sense if you analyze it. Which I did, and I realized that if I was going to stick to my guns and write the books I wanted to write, it was going to be a tough, hard career, and it has been. I mean, as far as if you're ambitious, you know, so I had to realize that I wasn't ever going to hit the big time.
Job at Dartmouth helped.
Well, the job at Dartmouth has given me. I'm so grateful. You know, the job at Dartmouth, selfishly, has done one really big thing, giving me my mornings to work on my own stuff. And I couldn't do that when I was working for a newspaper. So I'm really grateful for that. And also, because I have a job to feed my family, I can actually write the books I wanted to write. So even though I don't have a huge readership, I can say with all honesty that I've actually written what I wanted to write. So there's a long answer to your question.